Souls, demons, welcome back. Today I have 2 tantalizing ghost horror stories. As always, if you've been enjoying the show so far, please leave a 5-star rating, a thumbs up, or a share. Let's keep the stories alive. And with that, let's sit back, grip our seats, and enjoy the show. This first story is called The Class, written by A.J.M. My life has been somewhat defined by an experience I had when I was younger. I think so often back to the time my experience happened. Nobody ever believed my story at the time, so I decided to write it now for the world to see. It all began when I was 14 or so, when my family moved homes. My dad had been offered a job with better pay, and a month later, we had sold our house and rented an apartment in our new town. We moved during the summer, so it was simple starting at my new school. When the term began, I nervously walked from our apartment building to the school, which was rather close. I hadn't had the chance to meet any local kids, so I knew nobody and was scared of having to make new friends all alone. I don't recall really speaking to anyone that morning. I was too shy. I just took my timetable in a slightly trembling hand and looked to see what my first class was. Math in room 104. I checked the little school map handout I had been given. I looked at that map over and over. I couldn't see my classroom number at all. By then, no staff were around me and I began to panic. Where the hell do I go? I noticed on the layout of the building that there was a whole section to the right of the school that seemed to have plenty of classroom-sized rooms, but no numbers. The class numbers on the left side of the school were numbers 300 to 310. The center of the building had rooms designated in the 200 to 230 range. I decided my classroom 104 would logically be to the right. I walked down long corridors. Most of the other students were not new, and so they had already made it to their classes while I contemplated my map. Because of this, the corridors were now deserted. In retrospect, I should have just found the help desk and asked them to give me directions. But I was so shy, I'd rather have tried to do it alone. Anyways, I followed the building layout, and at the end of an eerily quiet and long corridor, my passage was blocked by rather old-looking wooden double doors that didn't open when I pushed. This seemed wrong, like this part of the building was not meant to be entered. I played with the idea that someone had accidentally shut them, or maybe I just wasn't pushing hard enough. I rammed into the doors with my shoulder, and with a scraping sound of metal on wood, they opened. I realized then that I'd broken the bolts on the other side of the door, which were brittle with rust. Horrified at having broken a door lock on my first day, I was about to turn and run from the scene, and just asked someone to help me find my class. I obviously shouldn't be in this part of the school. The new corridor was old and dusty. The lockers were all hanging open and unused. A faint smell of mold hung in the air. As I turned, I noticed the numbers painted on the glass windows of the doors along the corridor. The one nearest to me read 100. Perplexed, I checked my timetable again to assure myself that I had read my class number correctly. It was clear. My room was 104, and just along this corridor apparently. I began to walk slowly, looking into the windows of each class I passed. 100, empty. 101, empty. 102, empty except for a plastic skeleton hanging in the corner by a pile of yellowing student lab coats. Still, it was enough to make me flinch. As I checked 103, empty, I heard the voice of an adult man coming from the room opposite, room 104. I peeked through the window. Full. Except it wasn't what I expected to see. Sure, there was a teacher, wearing a worn brown suit and blue bow tie, and there were students, all focused on this teacher, sitting apart from one another in old-fashioned wooden tables. What made me pause was what they were wearing. Kids didn't dress like that anymore. It looked like a classroom from an old film or show. The teacher stood beside a blackboard, dusty from chalk. Despite this oddity, I knocked on the door. I assumed the school had a poor budget. The teacher didn't notice my knocking, so I quietly opened the door and walked in. None of the students took their gaze away from the teacher, who also paid no attention to me. I awkwardly apologized for my lateness, citing that I had gotten lost. I then made my way over to the only free seat in the room and sat down. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment. I must have interrupted the class, I thought. The teacher began his lesson a few seconds later rather casually. His name was Mr. Talori. He began to chalk equations on the board and got the class to solve them. The lesson was rather ordinary, except for the fact that no calculators were used. Whenever I raised my hand to answer a question, almost to try and win back favor from the teacher, he ignored it and always chose another student to answer the problem. The lesson ended abruptly after what felt like hours. By the end of it, I was bored and miserable. I just wanted to get home and complain about the way I was ignored. When I left the room, I felt pangs of hunger. I glanced at my watch and was shocked to see the school day had ended. A whole day of math? Horror. I had decided I hated that school. I walked slowly home, going over the day's events in my mind. It was all very weird, but I supposed I would get used to this new school, eventually. When I got home, my mother was talking on the home phone. Her face displayed confusion. She heard me come in and frowned when she saw me. She looked somewhat angry and asked whoever was on the other end of the phone line to hold, and then she accused me of skipping school. Confusion followed. I told her I was in class all day, but apparently the school had phoned to say I wasn't in any lessons and hadn't seen me after I collected my timetable. I said I was in Mr. Talori's class in room 104 all day. I must have missed the register when I was late, I thought. My mom paused and told the school on the phone my story. Her expression froze after a few seconds, and then she looked at me rather worriedly. She hung up the phone and told me what the school had said. Mr. Talori had not worked at the school in 38 years. Apparently, room 104 was part of an abandoned section of the school that hadn't been used since a school shooting nearly 40 years ago. The school thought I was playing some sick joke. That night, I went on the web to find out if what the school said was true. Quickly, I had found old newspaper articles about the school massacre that had been archived. A nutjob had walked into the school with several guns and shot a whole class of children and a teacher dead. He had blocked the doorway and shot everyone in a single classroom in a random act of carnage. An old grainy photo showed the class where the murders happened. I recognized it immediately. It was room 104. An obituary showed tributes to the dead and photos of all that had died. I recognized them too. Mr. Talori and all the students I had spent a day with. My heart felt like it had stopped. I felt sick. I felt cold to my bones at that moment. After that day, I requested to change schools. Now, years later, I've written this, my account of what happened to me. which nobody had ever believed. The reason, why now? Well, yesterday, I received a letter in the post. There was no address. It had simply appeared through my letterbox. It was a class reunion invite, signed by my old teacher, Mr. Talori. Alright, and the second story is called The Abomination Man, written by Karate Girl 2012. Haley entered the dusty hallway where the middle of the abandoned mansion lay. She'd been hired to clean out the house of a rich man, once a soldier convicted of genocide, who died of his injuries a few hundred years ago. The mansion didn't feel like a home, more like a haunted house. The light shone through the windows, and the cracks in the floorboards creaked as she walked on them, sweeping the dust from the corners of the room. Walking further down the dimly lit hallway, she saw a small trapdoor. Opening it up, she went down underneath to clean out the cellar. Perhaps they could make this place a study or a laundry room for the next tenants. As she descended the stairs, the light began to fade away, and soon it was as dark as night. Trying to work with the dim streaks of light going through the gaps in the floorboards, she started to move the strange cardboard boxes out near the staircase and swept the edges of the floor. Soon, she couldn't see anything and took out her phone, a dim light to support her whilst she tidied the place up, ready for renovation. It was starting to get increasingly colder as she walked through the cellar. She felt for a wall, but there were none, just empty space. Never had she known a cellar as big as this. She shone a light of her phone in front of her. All she could see was boxes and empty space. It was too big to clean that day. They'd just have to find a way of cleaning it out afterwards. She walked back towards the area of the staircase, where the trapdoor lay wide open. Suddenly, she heard a slam. The room became dark and colder, whilst creaking noises started to emerge. The trapdoor had somehow shut on its own. Haley became scared. She wandered up the stairs, however. She screamed as she slipped, realizing the light of her phone was not enough to guide her. The door was shut tightly and could only be opened from the outside. She screamed out, hoping the builders that came with her could hear her. However, nobody answered. Her phone was running out of battery, and she shivered, looking down at the cold, dark insides of the cellar. She shined the light around. The light shone onto a little wooden sign with little black letters carved into them. Haley walked towards the signs to examine the letters closer. It was much farther into the depths of the cellar. She squinted as she tried to make out the letters. Walking closer, she realized that it said "out," with a little arrow pointing into the direction of the cellar. There must be a door or something at the other end, she thought with a sigh of relief. Still, it was pretty scary being all alone in a dark tunnel. Haley walked deeper into the cellar. It seemed like it would never end. She was walking around and touching the walls next to her. She was just about to doubt that there was ever an opening when she saw another sign. It had an arrow pointing the way she was going. The sign gave her a little relief. Then, her phone light shone onto a newspaper with an article titled, "Abomination Man Kills 200. Wiping off the cobwebs, she picked up the paper and read the first paragraph. 1926. Abomination Man John Discuff of Germany kills 200. 200 British citizens were killed after a soldier under the name of John Discuff set a forest on fire. The man accused is nowhere to be found and is rumored to be injured, either one or both legs disfigured after a previous, serious bombing. It was probably the doing of the man that lived in this house. Genocide and a German soldier. It matched. It was this ruthless killing machine that was nicknamed the Abomination Man for his doings. Haley walked further into the cellar, hoping to see a door, but the light revealed nothing. Then, she spotted another sign in the distance, written in black letters. "Keep going," it said, with an arrow pointing further into the darkness. Whoever made the signs must have thought people wanted to go to the loo or something. Haley walked further in, spotting another sign. This time, it was written in small red letters. "Are you still going?" it said. "Yes, I am," chuckled Haley quietly. She stopped and looked around. Seeing another newspaper, she bent down and read it. 1928. Abomination Man strikes again. 2 years after his last attack, Abomination Man, also known as previous German soldier John Diskoff, is suspected to have killed 50 people after burning down a set of tents in the eastern coast of England. He is still on the loose. Witnesses please appeal. Standing up and walking again, Haley descended into the darkness even further. Spotting another sign, she walked past it, not bothering to look. Then she saw something and looked back, walking to the sign again. "Are you still alive?" Haley felt a chill run down her spine. It was written in bigger, dark red colored ink. This sign creeped her out. She just wanted to get out of the place already, as it was very cold and the darkness was scaring her. Walking with a slightly faster pace, she spotted a pile of newspapers, all with the name Abomination Man as their headline. As the dates increased, she then saw a paper that caught her attention. 2 builders missing after visiting previous abode of Abomination Man. She put down the newspaper and started walking faster. Haley was cold, hungry, scared, and miserable, and had no idea how long she'd been in the building for. Spotting another sign in the distance, she walked towards it. Entering the graveyard, Haley was confused and utterly in shock. What did graveyard mean? She walked forwards, starting to pant. Her phone was running out of battery, and if she continued like this, she wouldn't be able to see anything soon. The light was dim and hard to see with. Shivering from the cold, Haley suddenly spotted another sign. "Get out now." Her eyes widened, and her heartbeat raised. Something was wrong here. Totally wrong. Where were the arrows that guided her before? What was with the disturbing messages? Haley shuddered. Her instincts told her to do something. She started sweating, and before she could shriek out loud, she spotted another sign nailed to the wall. "Ha ha, you're dead now." The words were written in dark red ink. Wait. No, that wasn't ink at all. It made drip marks down the wooden signboard, and it was uniquely dark red. It was blood. Real blood. Haley was sweating hard now. What the heck was going on? Were there ghosts? "Help!" she yelled. "Help!" Her own voice echoed through the cellar, which seemed to carry on as far as the world would go on for. She started to panic and ran forwards, ignoring the signs and newspapers she ran past. Crying and screaming, she ran as fast as she could, not noticing the paper boxes increasing in number and newspapers strewn across the floor that she was treading on. Suddenly, She screamed out loud as she tripped over something, rather like a long box, and fell flat on her face. Her phone landed on the floor next to her, and after a brief moment of choking on her own tears, she picked it up and used it to look around. Her heart was in her mouth as she spotted a little brown sign with red writing on it. Dreading the worst, she walked over and read it. It was not anything that she had expected. Here lies John Discuff, Abomination Man, 1895 to 1943. Looking down, she spotted that she had tripped over a small wooden coffin. She turned around to run, but her head slammed into a hard wall. There was no more empty space. The tunnel ended here, and there was no way out. Haley cried and walked around the coffin to run back through the tunnel, tripping over paper boxes and other items as she passed. Suddenly, she heard a creaking noise. Pointing her phone light over to the coffin where the noise came from, she saw the lid open and a large, bony hand emerged from the side. Paralyzed with fear, Haley fell down on the cardboard boxes and stared straight at the coffin. Something emerged from the box. A man with bandaged arms. Wait, it wasn't a man. It just had a skeletal head with a few strands of hair and 2 arms attached to a torso. It had no waist and no legs. Its hollow eyes stared straight at her, its teeth twisting into a crooked smile as it cackled. John Discuff, the living corpse of the Abomination Man. Screaming, Haley jumped up and ran. She closed her eyes and ran as fast as she could, not thinking about anything except for the hideous sight she'd seen. Then, she stopped in her tracks as she smelled something. Something was burning. She hadn't noticed that her phone had run out of battery. However, the hallway was still lit up. Looking back, she saw red and yellow everywhere. The cardboard boxes and newspaper carried the fire swiftly towards her. "Help! Help!" she screamed, running and clawing at the walls. Turning around, she saw the silhouette of a man, with a skeletal head and no legs, walking and supported by just his arms. His gray skin shone in the flames, and he opened his mouth to cackle. Then, the flames engulfed her.